The deaf and the hearing impaired are a neglected population in Hong Kong. Although deaf education began many years ago, only a handful of them have been able to receive tertiary education and pursue professional occupations. I was honored to have the opportunity to interview Professor Gladys, the director of the Center for Sign Linguistics and Deaf Studies from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Mr. Chris Yu, the program manager of the Sign Bilingualism and Co-enrolment in Mainstream Deaf Education program. A few deaf adults also shared with me their experiences growing up in both mainstream schools and deaf schools. Please join me on this journey to develop a better understanding towards the deaf community, focusing particularly on their education system. We say the deaf are the invisible handicapped because it is hard for the hearing population to access their mind through language, and they don't know how to access us. And we all know that communication is key. And there are many barriers that are preventing them from developing their potential in access to further education and further careers. There are 90,000 hearing impaired and deaf people in Hong Kong, and 1 in 300 babies are born with a degree of hearing impairment, relative to different countries around the world. In many countries such as America and Canada, with the support of the Government of Translation Services in Education, deaf people are able to excel in their studies, receive tertiary education, and choose the disciplines they enjoy, such as becoming a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer, etc. However, this is not the case in Hong Kong, but it is not surprising with the insufficient education module currently. Today, there are 5,000 deaf students in Hong Kong and have access to only 2 options for their education: the Lutheran School for the Deaf, the only deaf school in Hong Kong, or a mainstream local school setting. The Lutheran School for the Deaf only began using sign language to teach recently, teaching with only speech, a language that has many barriers, and to simply rely on the oral language to learn is exhausting and draining for the deaf. In deaf schools, they are able to have a sense of belonging and identity, but only have interaction with deaf peers, so it is hard to integrate into the society in the future. Furthermore, it has been said that they have a slower academic teaching pace. In mainstream schools, they have a regular paced learning and interaction with the hearing community, but they are usually isolated as there is only 1 deaf student in the entire school, and there is a bigger chance of bullying and discrimination. Not only that, there are no special accommodations for deaf students, such as sign language support, etc. The 2 meager education models available to deaf students currently do not meet the needs of the deaf, as they are not given sign support and an inclusive environment.
Now, if we want to remove the barrier of learning of deaf people, you have to be clear that the major barrier is communication in class.
Students, they knew sign language, but they were not allowed to use their hands to communicate in the classroom. The teachers were not allowed to use sign language to teach them. So at the end, if they only rely on speech, there's no way for them to retrieve information from the teaching. That might explain why they just can't do public examination, because they are just way below par. But we are talking about almost like 5-6 decades of education. And if we are only talking about 52 deaf students who could manage to go to university, the number should be quite small. To support our deaf community, one way is really to revamp their education.
There are only 10 official sign language interpreters in Hong Kong, for a large population of 90,000. Approximately 85.9% of deaf people are economically inactive, and the jobs offered to the deaf are mostly low-skilled jobs such as the transport of goods, selling buns, and washing cars. When we scavenged for some answers, we realized that the main problem is that they failed in their education due to the inadequate education system and can't get good academic attainment to pursue further education and develop their careers. Only 5.8% of the deaf population have post-secondary education. Even when they are admitted into tertiary institutions, many end up quitting because there is a lack of effective sign language support. Unlike other countries where the government provides sign language interpretation service, as it is a basics on equal opportunities in learning. But have we ever stopped to think, deaf people and hearing people are the same? They have normal IQ, they grow up, they find jobs, support their families just like we would. But the only difference is that they can't hear as well, and sign language is their foundation language. The deaf community is a part of our society, and we should all be aware of their needs. understand their difficulties, and support their educational needs to give them an equal opportunity to help build a more inclusive, harmonized environment where we do not just coexist, but integrate with hearing impaired and deaf people. When William was 3, he had high fever and lost his hearing. He grew up in a hearing family as the only deaf child and went to a mainstream school setting. He is an oral deaf. His first language is a spoken language before he began learning sign language as an adult. He shares with us the difficulties he's faced, such as discrimination from teachers and classmates, and also relying purely on hearing aids and reading lips to learn.
咁我讀班同學啦，語報學得嚟講係聽唔到，語報聽得到一提就妥啦。嗰次係我發音講嘢啦好差，個唔識表達。咁我唔識表達點知點樣講啊？咁我讀自理班，咁我就知係數學嗰個背默要講出嚟，嗰個加得一正二得二，但語報表達出嚟，每一班同學啦要講出嚟，但係到我啦，其實就講出嚟。老師話即係佢話咩啊？我睇你唔知你講乜嘢，我俾你50班好唔好啊？我咁都話多謝係夜晚温到好夜，我背得好足。咁我最後俾50班，我真係冇嘢講。譬如話我讀錯發音唔係好準，咩地，俾同學啦聽怪怪地。咁我俾同學語班咧，同學似我咁樣。
翻屋企係咪喊啊？即係次次俾人治療，定係你？
我唔記得。我爸佢話蝦好多年都係咁，我爸佢都唔記得。
即係習慣。
係啊。
Unfortunately, no child can be completely immune to bullying. After struggling and working hard through secondary school, he was successfully accepted into university, but ended up quitting as he was unable to comprehend anything due to the lack of deaf support such as PowerPoint, sign interpretation, and FM radios.
老師咧係覺得好快，皮字有中間啊，覺得慢慢都話我講啊，都話聽唔似，都話坐喺度啦，唔知老師講乜嘢。咁我要話靠習題標書面，但係老師講嘢係理論，我深入啊，我唔夠深入。咁我要記糊下咁樣咯。咁我糊考記咗麻麻地，咪比較差啲。中午後來到9分好差，咁我再讀中午，咁我最後攞13分，然後讀 R2，讀會計物品。注意部老師啦，係我撲下撲，咩都冇。注意部喺白校改嘢，坐喺度啦。唔知老師講乜嘢，都唔知點樣同同學將住一齊。因為一次係 RBE 係讀有 project 啊合作啦一組啦，每一組有6個啦。同學話我好麻煩，我幫你做埋啦，你唔使一齊做。咁我坐喺度讀咗3個月，我覺得讀咗3個月係粵語學唔到，粵語吸收唔到，再要讀咗3個月，我覺得諗咗好耐，最後啦決定退學都唔讀，放棄咗。咁我喺屋企匿埋，你話喊。
Although William wore hearing aids to school, he still found it difficult to comprehend his teachers. Why is this? Let's now take a look at what hearing aids are. Hearing devices do not work like glasses do. They do not bring back normal hearing. Latest technologies, such as hearing aids, cochlear implants, auditory brainstem implants, only help amplify sounds. But when it is transmitted into the brain, the sounds are metallic, and it's difficult for the brain to completely process the sounds for full comprehension. Pippin was raised in a deaf family, and he will now share with us his experience studying in a deaf school. He tells us about the situation of low academic standards during that time, where there was no sign support available, and the hardships of learning.
老師就會企喺前邊啦，佢喺黑板寫嗰陣時咧，我哋就會自己靜靜雞咁樣打手語傾偈啦。當老師一望住我哋咧，或者問我問題嘅時候，我答咧我都係要用翻口語去答翻嘅。所有同學都係一樣係用口語去答翻講嘢啦。咁好似有老師佢會做咗好多年嘢啦，佢熟咗之後咧就會開始識少少手語啦。咁我哋就可以用少少手語，再加埋用口語咁去同佢答 回答佢問題啦。但係如果有新老師入嚟嘅話咧，佢哋又唔識手語，咁我都係要用翻口語嚟同佢答翻啦。我以前老師咧，啱啱我講過，我哋老師咧就講好多，但係用手語嚟教就好少。我就唔係100%明白啦，唔係嘅。好似咁，我諗我明大概40% 左右啦。我到中午嗰陣時咧，先學過一啲健聽嘅，用佢哋健聽嘅教材係中3咯。咁就即係我哋其實學嘅進度啊慢咗，同埋有好多內容其實係漏咗，我就覺得麻麻嘅。跟住我覺得畢業完之後咧，我依家覺得以前讀書啊，好似都係麻麻，但係點解麻麻咧？其實係因為以前老師俾我嘅機會少。中五畢業之後，想再繼續讀書嘅話咧，譬如去 Ivy 嗰度讀書啊，或者高級文憑啊咁樣，咁就覺得嗰度係唔夠一個專業嘅手語翻譯支持嘅，就令到我哋其實聾人就想繼續去讀書嘅一個動力就冇咗。
He also tells us about the difficulties in finding jobs, particularly as a deaf person, and the day-to-day bias.
好似嗰啲健聽人揾工咁樣啦，其實香港嘅健聽人揾工都一樣難嘅，我都知。咁但係我別係聾人，所以就更加之難啦揾嘢做。咁樣以前我試過啦，做嗰啲嘢就唔係好低，例如去送貨啦，送貨就做咗2年差唔多。好似例如我會同埋一班聾人朋友一齊出去啦，去打籃球咁樣啦。去打籃球，跟住完咗之後咧，我哋就會一齊去食飯啦。跟住我哋就會坐喺張圓台嗰度，咁有其他嗰啲健聽嘅人其實唔識嘅，咁佢哋就會見到我哋有啲動作喺度打緊手語啦，咁佢就好有少少咁喺度歧視我嘅喎。但我覺得啱，我哋聾人其實係用手語溝通啦，咁樣。但係嗰啲健聽人坐喺度就喺度會覺得我哋。就會覺得我哋係因為聽唔到，所以係隨便喺度動作啊，咁樣喺度示範啊，咁樣，咁佢哋就覺得呢啲健聽人其實有啲歧視，同埋覺得嗰啲健聽人好似唔係好中意咁樣啦。
Different sign languages are used in different countries in the world, similar to spoken languages. Not only that, sign languages are also processed mainly in the Broncas and Wernicke's areas in the left hemisphere of the brain, same as spoken languages. According to the World Federation of the Deaf, the only difference between sign and spoken languages is that sign languages are visual gestural languages, and spoken languages are auditory vocal languages. Sign languages consist of movements of the upper torso, facial expressions, and hand-arm configurations, instead of the vocal tract and mouth. In fact, the sound system, grammar, vocabulary, and syntax of sign languages can be described and analyzed.
The deaf child can develop the language competence to support their future development.
即係其他人可能就會將個焦點放咗佢哋個 hearing disability 嗰度，咁但係其實就唔應該即係唔使咁拘謹。其實佢哋主要嘅困難都係喺個溝通，喺個 communication 嗰度。咁我哋睇咧就係話聾人用手語啦，咁你哋就用 oral 即係用口語啦。咁我哋睇嘅 communication 就係 language difference 嘅啫。係啦，同埋一啲嘅 cultural difference， 即係我哋聾人都有一個 deaf culture 嘅。
Deaf people don't want to feel inferior just because we have a language difference. All we need is mutual understanding, communication, and establish an equal status. To create a more integrated and harmonized society, there's definitely more to be done. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. As such, we must begin by improving the education for the deaf. The Center for Sign Linguistics and Deaf Studies from the Chinese University of Hong Kong have been experimenting with a new method of educating the deaf since 2006, with the deaf concentrated in a mainstream school with hearing students and deaf support through a program called Sign Bilingualism Co-enrolment program. It is currently running in a kindergarten, a primary, and a secondary school. The Peace Evangelical Center Kindergarten, the Kowloon Bay St. John the Baptist Catholic Primary School, and the Notre Dame College. This program pulls together the advantages of a mainstream school and the advantages of a deaf school. It has proven to be meaningful and a success to both the hearing and deaf students, yet is not funded by the government. Funds are needed to sustain this program and possibly even expand into tertiary education.
Now, starting from 2006, we have conducted research to track the development of the deaf students. We don't have the worries that having sign language learning will hinder their oral language development.
This is the success of the Sign Bilingual program in Hong Kong, simply because they are supported by sign language, they are supported by a deaf teacher. At the same time, they are given lots and lots of opportunities for interaction with a lot of hearing students, and that's why they can also develop their speech.
同樣咁樣可以得到高水平嘅教育啦，咁同埋佢哋可以咧就互相了解。咁咧喺第時到佢哋畢業出咗嚟之後咧，咁喺呢個社會上面咧，咁佢哋都可以幫手建立一個咧更加好嘅一個即係共融嘅文化咯。呢一樣嘢係我哋好想見到嘅。咁我哋覺得呢一個係一個 win-win 嘅 situation。
其實係一間主流嘅中學咯，咁就會同聾校完全唔同啦，因為佢個課程係同普通學校其實係冇分別咯。
And we find that actually they are having a growth rate comparable to the hearing piece. And in terms of social relationships, we are quite glad that the deaf students are having quite positive attitude towards their own hearing impairment.
But kids are kids always, so they keep on chatting with each other sometimes, but I'm happy because they don't feel they are insufficient. That means they feel that they could be part in the classroom, so that is what I feel happy about.
冇人係會想估下咁樣去學習，咁所以我哋喺課堂度啦，就盡量咧就係用一個佢哋可以吸收得最多嘅模式去，即係俾佢哋去學習。我以前咧讀書嗰陣冇一個education 嘅模式嘅，咁淨係都 oral 嘅環境度大，咁其實係好辛苦嘅讀書，睇得好辛苦啦，二來又聽得好辛苦啦。以一個聾人老師嘅身份入呢個 program 咧，其實我係睇到係啲學生係學得好開心，大家係 equal 嘅，就係互相互補嘅。呢個我一直嘅希望呢個可以繼續延續落去咯。
大個想做老師，想幫下一代嘅聾童可以教到佢哋讀書，話俾社會知道聾童或者聾人都係同健全平等嘅。
The hearing impaired and the deaf are having a difficult time integrating and developing in our society in Hong Kong. We must support them and understand their needs so that they can have an equal opportunity. Thank you for joining me on this journey and helping make Hong Kong a more welcoming and inclusive society for all.